So I would, in all honesty, if you put it down like there's a sort of a wish list, but you want a long term, which means you work towards something maybe in 5 years that's producing some fruit or something, because vegetables is the hard work side of it. You've got to get in and plant and weed and harvest and all of that. Cut off a piece, say this is what we want to play with, and that's a big piece. But you've got to do something by hand, eh? So you sort of work out what's manageable if you're going to do it. Well, kia ora no tātou nei. Ko Nick ara eri oskus taku ingo uri o te maunga taranaki nei, me atu ki tātou. So Māori horticulture, I don't know if I could say I was drawn to it, but my upbringing was, our family, so I'm from Taranaki originally, but I grew up in my teenage years down in the Rangitiko, and our family were spud pickers and in the shearing, so in that circuit of seasonal work. So we grew up on the crops, and we grew up contracting to do the different labour requirements for the crops at different times of the year. So I guess that was my entry to horticulture. But so I had worked for 20 odd years contracting with the growers, with the farmers, and then when I was about 33, 34, I was encouraged to go and do a course at Massey because I had never finished high school, and so then a few years later I'm in charge of the program at Massey. So but I've retired now. So I did a degree and I went back to the crops because you've got family and mortgage, all those sorts of things, and then Massey asked me to go back and look after the Māori agribusiness program, which I did, and as part of that I was asked to do a PhD, which I did I would have been late 40s when I finished that, and since that time have taken on all sorts of odd roles which are all connected to the horticulture sector. So yeah.
This kaupapa was gifted its name by our pakete Uncle Jackie and Auntie Hera to commemorate the birth of a pepe hau on Te Taua Pāmu. Te aroha is the puna that nourishes and sustains our aspirations. Project Te Aroha has two distinct rina or arms, Te Taua Pāmu, which is MAPIP, and Whenua Ora, which is surf. Te Taua Pāmu is concentrated on production and performance, assessing farm operations and systems, reviewing and planning upgrades, building operational and management capability, and providing advisory support. A transition plan, wānanga that brings everyone together to look at best ways of using our whenua, and then a farm optimisation report with recommendations for improvements. Together, these arms reflect our strategic direction, commercial success that affirms our legacy, and enduring kaitiakitanga that protects our taio and empowers our people.
The resource, we're sort of brought up to see it as a physical component or element, and yet there are these other elements that support it. So it's actually made up of a combination of different elements. And it's trying to get people to take a step back and see how those other dimensions add value to the resource as a whole. So being the physical is the easy one, and you will have seen today with the experts who are, the experts in the technology around the resource. But there are other expertise that comes in, and a lot of that's cultural. So, for example, the spiritual, or the whanaunga, the whakapapa and all of that, all elements which can vary wherever you are in the country, but they come from a relationship with the soil. So they don't come from just a purpose of using it, but they come from a long-standing relationship. And then probably the one that's undervalued the most is the hinenga, or the actual knowledge systems that sit around the resources, and we undervalue the knowledge that we can add. So academics and experts and technical people can all bring knowledge systems, which is really great, but so can our culture. But there's the physical, the whenua, all of that natural resource you want to interact with. There's the spiritual, and I don't need to elaborate on that, but it's there, it's another dimension to how we work. There's the social, because all of these things are a component of the community at large, and everything has whakapapa, everything in some way connects, so there's a social dimension. And then there's what we would call hinengaro, the intellectual dimension. People generally to understand that there are different dimensions to the resource that we're familiar with. One season we went and picked parsley, of all things, by a grower in Wakene, and he was the only parsley grower in the country, and he had about, say, 6 acres of parsley. He's passed away since, so there's no one growing it, but he had the market absolutely cornered to get parsley all around the country, and because he was at Aroha, the trucks mostly went past. So he just needed to have a system of the logistics, you know, calling past and getting his parsley out there. If he had lived anywhere else, he probably wouldn't be growing it. But he had his market sussed, and he knew exactly how much it could take up, so he wasn't excess and all of that. But parsley is quite a heavy feeder, you know, you're constantly growing, so you also have to have a plan B about moving those crops around, so it's not, can't be grown year after year after year in the same location. So, you know, so he had to move to other locations and lease soil to be able to do it. But how many of you know parsley growers, commercial parsley growers? None of you. You know, we worked another bit later than that for someone growing watercress, because Woolworths or whoever it was said, got a market for watercress. It's not that easy. You harvest watercress that's grown for the market, within a day it's going yellow. So if it's not put into the market the same day, the quality drops, the return drops. So, you know, it's a high risk product. So you wouldn't suggest to anybody who was new to the game to grow watercress. They tell you that your soil is lacking a certain nutrient. Okay, to play, you can put some nutrient on, but as soon as you do that, something else becomes lacking. You can feed that, as soon as you do that, something else becomes lacking. So the law of limiting returns means you can deal with one thing at a time, but the next limiting factor kicks in. So it's never a one response fixes all the evidence. So you have to understand the relationship between all those limiting factors and work the relationship so that you get the best output. And you're never going to have something that's perfect, but you are going to have a resource that if you manage it properly, you have the opportunity to extend your relationship and build on the relationship, and it provides back in the sense of income or employment or whatever you might be looking for. It can do that. We were always in the old world guaranteed our sustenance through papa tuanuku. It was never don't go there, but it was always about be appropriate how you work with papa tuanuku and be appropriate about how you exploit. It's the wrong word, but it is the word that they use, how you take advantage of that resource going forward. So soil health really is an extension of our health because we rely on the soil for so much, and we tend to undervalue exactly what the soil gives to our, to our well-being, recognising that the foods we eat, the dairy products, the meat, the vegetables, all have a relationship to the soil because they're grown through that relationship. So the obvious would be that if the health is at this end of the spectrum, then it flows through. It's that kiutiki tai, from the source to the outflow. It's the same concept that the well-being will come through, and we're part of that journey. So it's recognising, and I think it's part of the previous question about the elements. is understanding that the soil is papa tuanuku and that we are alongside for the journey rather than leading the journey. So we want the soil health to be a key component of our relationship. Understand its origins, understand the relationship, the previous use of the soil, for example. So rather than just hoping somebody else has that, but to actually sort of rebuild that relationship. So I think even for our young ones to get out there and recognise different types of soils, get out there and understand the relationship between the river, the awa, and the soil. You know, so it's that little bit of regather, recoup, and sort of rebuild the knowledge and the relationship. You know, it's been a little while since I was here, but 30 odd years ago we were doing soil tests all up and down the valleys as part of my studies, really. So with Mataroa, Nikora and what have you was living on the other side. So we sort of come back frequently for sort of just a revision of what we used to do here and all the different things, looking at crops. So I grew up many years ago when we sort of didn't go to school, we ended up having to be on the paddocks, and in our case, and I was living in a place called Ringaiti, which is on the main highway, but it's a long way from anywhere. But the key lifestyle was shearing and spud picking. And so I took over the spud picking for one of the gangs there, a place called Rangawahia, and we picked spuds. So this is in the 60s and the 70s. And now I'm basically telling people how to select or grow spuds and all that sort of thing. But times have changed a lot. And if you are looking at something from a Māori perspective or a cultural perspective, our generation doesn't matter. It's the generation that we can't see yet. So there's a headspace about getting out of being the people that have to gain from this, to actually thinking about 50 or 100 years. I work with Wakatū, the incorporation in the Te Tauihu, the top of the south, and their strategic plan is 300 years, because their concept about looking after the resource with the estate that they have is about the unseen. 300 years. The difficulty in that is you don't know what pressure is going to be on that resource over 300 years, and you'll see it now with all of the climate and those different things that are. We didn't plan for all of the cyclones and the different things that have come along, but we have to deal with them. So somewhere in our thinking, we also have to build in that resilience component. What happens? You know, whenever we were here, it was probably 30, 35 years ago, we planted some crops over in Waimana. They got washed out 2 years in a row because of unseasonal weather. And so the crops went out before the heavy rains had come. So learning experience for those locally, having said that, they thought those locations were ideal for those crops at the time. So you're constantly learning, and you're constantly taking lessons from Papa Tuanuku to build into your toolbox, your knowledge.